sorry that Curtis Perez cannot be here tonight, but I'm glad to be with you. So here are Curtis's remarks for us. The title of this talk is Resisting the New Civility. In December of last year, the members of the American Studies Association voted to endorse a boycott of Israeli academic institutions. The ASA is the oldest and largest academic association devoted to the study of U.S. history and culture, and for the last decade or so, it has been in the foreground of the study of U.S. imperialism. Our vote generated the largest turnout for an election in the ASA's history, and about 2/3 of voting members affirmed the boycott. Predictions of the ASA's immediate demise have proven to be premature. On the contrary, in the wake of the boycott, we have seen a significant increase in both membership and fundraising, while our upcoming convention on November 6th to 9th in Los Angeles is packed with participants, including a number of panels on Israel-Palestine. One lesson is that an academic organization can not only survive, but thrive in the wake of a boycott. While we argue that the boycott was part of an effort to defend academic freedom and educational access for all people, including Palestinians, critics of the ASA, including a large number of university presidents, condemned the boycott as a violation of academic freedom. More recently, as the new school year ramps up, the discursive terrain has shifted, and administrators pondering the perceived need to limit academic freedom and free speech have instead been using the language of, quote, civility. Whereas immediately after the boycott vote, the ASA was met with pious statements of unqualified support for academic freedom and free speech, now we are told that free speech must be qualified by something called civility. In practice, civility has emerged as the privileged means of silencing political speech while denying that's what is happening. And while the administration at University of Illinois has used the idea of civility to fire and discipline faculty, in a recent blog post titled Civility and Racism at the University of Michigan, members of the Student Union of Michigan persuasively argued that civility is being turned on students, particularly students of color, who are often stereotyped as naturally irrational, threatening, and violent. How can students and faculty effectively counter the new civility? I can't say I have the answers, but my experience with the ASA has led me to a few conclusions. First, I do not think we can easily reappropriate or re-articulate ideas of civility, but instead need to confront their limits head-on. Indeed, it is important to work together to push back against the idea that speech and activity critical of Israel is inherently and uniquely uncivil. In his recent press conference, Steven Salaita argued that his firing for his tweets critical of Israel suggests a kind of Palestinian exception that denies free speech and academic freedoms to Palestinians. And I think a corollary of the logic of the Palestinian exception is that by its very nature, criticism of Israel is exceptionally uncivil. And yet, while we continue to contest ideas of civility, it is important to remember that no one has a monopoly on impassioned and heated rhetoric. On the contrary, critics of the ASA, including some professors, bombarded us with grotesque and vicious hate mail, which has been archived at the website BDS Love Letters. I have to give a shout out to Sarah Roberts in Canada, who's actually a University of Illinois PhD who created that site. It's extraordinarily entertaining, and go look. The professors who hate mail use their university email accounts, and in one case, a college security guard sent me a death threat on his work email. It was reported to his employer, but to my knowledge, the security guard kept his job, as have, of course, the hate-mailing professors. While BDS proponents are often criticized for supposedly singling out Israel, it would seem that speech critical of Israel is often singled out as uncivil. Second, it is vital that we detail all of the ways in which notions of civility are antithetical to education. For example, in response to efforts to use Title VI to silence speech critical of Israel on campus, commentators in 2011 correctly wrote that, quote, the purpose of the university is to have students wrestle with ideas with which they may disagree, or even better, may make them uncomfortable. To censor ideas is to diminish education and to treat students as fragile recipients of knowledge rather than young critical thinkers. While this is lost on the contemporary proponents of civility, historically, U.S. intellectuals and educators have argued that critical thinking often requires resisting civility. A good example is the famous essay by Henry David Thoreau, entitled Resistance to Civil Government. The words civility and civil are related, and the implication of Thoreau's essay is that civility is problematic to the extent it means unquestioning deference to authority. More precisely, Thoreau argued that Americans have an ethical responsibility to resist their government's support for slavery and imperial expansion in Mexico by refusing to pay taxes in ways that anticipate our own unwillingness to see our tax dollars help fund the occupation. Thoreau makes his anti-war case with strong and passionate language. Quote, "Visit the Navy Yard and behold a Marine, such a man as an American government can make, or such as it can make a man with its black arts, a mere shadow and reminiscence of humanity, a man laid out alive and standing, and already, as one may say, buried under arms with funeral accompaniments. In most cases, there is no free exercise, whatever of the judgment or of the moral sense, but they put themselves on a level with wood and earth and stones. Such command no more respect than men of straw or a lump of dirt. They have the same sort of worth only as horses and dogs," unquote. If Thoreau were alive to make similar statements today, I have no doubt he would be blasted as uncivil. And yet the centrality of Thoreau to U.S. academic institutions suggests the extent to which universities have promoted, in theory and sometimes in practice, the value of critical thinking and action in opposition to the strictures of civility. Thoreau is widely read in high schools and colleges. University buildings, including student dorms, are named for him, and t-shirts, greeting cards, and coffee mugs with his image are often sold in campus bookstores. Finally, as the example of Thoreau and the title of the conference both suggest, in response to the new civility, it is important to emphasize the mainstream reverence for civil disobedience in general and boycotts in particular. The claim that criticizing Israel or advocating BDS is uncivil is part of an effort to paint such speech as marginal and beyond the pale in ways that deny their wide appeal. The so-called mainstream, for example, celebrates famous proponents of civil disobedience in general and boycotts in particular, including Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., and Cesar Chavez. Such celebrations are, of course, familiar features on campuses that honor MLK and Chavez on their birthdays during Black History Month and Hispanic Heritage Month, and in the names of various university buildings, streets, murals, statues, and centers. In these ways, resistance to the use of civility to silence criticism and debate has been institutionalized on college campuses in ways that in fact reveal the new civility as a radical departure from widely shared academic ideals.